Cassie in court, reportedly tearing up on the witness stand as she testifies against ex-Diddy in his sex trafficking trial.
Cassie told the jury that the freak-offs made her feel disgusting and humiliated and worthless.
Cassie Ventura just named Christina Courtroom as keeping tabs on her for Diddy.
She did say these freak-offs lasted between 1 and 4 days, and it would take her an equal amount of time to get her body recovered, to rehydrate, to rest.
Well, I think we're going to learn a lot about the nature of Cassie's relationship with Diddy.
Sean Combs watching her was really interesting because they haven't seen each other in at least 6 years.
Cassie started her testimony by calmly but clearly stating the facts. She was in a relationship with Diddy for over 10 years, and during that time, it wasn't just arguments and disagreements. It was violence, and not the kind you can brush off.
Charges. Diddy couldn't have done all of these crimes without his inner circle, right? Without his bodyguard, without his driver, without his assistant. They talked about alleged kidnappings. That one time he kidnapped his assistant to go and try to find Cassie when he thought Cassie was cheating. I mean, it was wild. I feel like I could go on forever, but I won't.
She described being dragged, hit in the head, and regularly left with black eyes. Her words weren't exaggerated. In fact, the prosecution emphasized that nothing had been taken out of context. This was her truth, raw and unfiltered. The abuse didn't come from isolated incidents. It was frequent and terrifyingly normalized. She said she never knew what would trigger him, only that no wasn't an option. If she said the wrong thing, there were consequences: verbal degradation, physical, punishment, and sometimes losing access to her own belongings like her phone and laptop. What shocked the court most wasn't just the violence, but how casually it was described, like it had become routine for her. Her fear wasn't just about bruises or broken skin, but about control, complete, calculated, psychological domination. She revealed she'd even turned over laptops and digital drives filled with evidence, photos, messages, documents.
Cassie Ventura described how freakoffs actually became a job, lasting 36 to 48 hours, the longest one lasting up to 4 days. No wonder the participants needed IV fluids after a freakoff. I'm just curious, to Lauren Cullen joining us at the courthouse, how was the jury responding?
These weren't rumors. This was the smoking gun. And from the moment her testimony began, the courtroom understood that this wasn't just a celebrity scandal. It was a cycle of abuse that had gone unchecked for a decade. When Cassie entered the music industry, it wasn't with a bang. It was with handcuffs, metaphorically speaking. She signed a 10-album deal with Bad Boy Records in 2006, but after her debut, she never released another full studio project. And not because she didn't create music. According to her, she recorded hundreds of songs. But none of it saw the light of day unless Diddy approved. She testified that he had the final say on everything, from lyrics to music videos to what events she was allowed to attend. Even party hosting gigs required his permission. Her manager at the time, James Cruz, allegedly told her straight up, managing her was like doing it with one hand tied behind his back, because everything had to go through Diddy. Cassie painted a picture of a woman trying to build a career while constantly walking on eggshells. She wanted to be seen as an artist, but Diddy treated her more like a puppet. The music world may have thought Cassie stepped back from fame on her own terms, but from her testimony, it sounds like she was never allowed to step forward in the first place. Her career was a mirage, an image Diddy allowed the public to see. While behind the scenes, she struggled to find autonomy in her art, her schedule, and even her finances.
Describe how every action during these freak-offs, which were between her and male escorts, not necessarily between her and her boyfriend, Sean Diddy Combs, he sat off to the side really directing things according to her and masturbating along with what he wanted to see. But he was in control, she said, of exactly how they did everything, from the platform shoes that she needed to wear, the clothes that she needed to wear occasionally, masks, wigs, whether or not the male escort could ejaculate, where he could ejaculate. Everything she said was controlled by him. Mind you, Brian, his children, 6 children, are in the courtroom at this point listening to all of this. And the jury was picked knowing that they needed a certain level of comfort to hear these types of descriptions. It was very emotional and really tough to hear, Brian.
One of the most chilling revelations in Cassie's testimony was her description of what she called freak-offs. She said these were organized sessions involving her, hired escorts, and sometimes Diddy watching or participating. They weren't occasional either. They started in the first year of their relationship and eventually became a weekly ritual for years. According to Cassie, she initially agreed to one out of fear and confusion, thinking it might please him. But what began as a single uncomfortable favor spiraled into a routine she couldn't escape. Some sessions lasted days, others required her to wear masks or assume aliases like Jackie Star. They happened in Diddy's homes, hotels, and even in places she lived. Cassie said the freak-offs weren't about desire. They were about control. The drugs, the choreography, the hired participants. It was all a performance, one she couldn't say no to. She admitted to dissociating during them, numbing herself emotionally to endure the psychological trauma. And she said bluntly she didn't want to do them. She never did. But when she tried to pull back, Diddy would become angry, manipulative, and sometimes violent. What's even more disturbing, some of these sessions, she claimed, were recorded, sometimes on her own devices, which she tried to delete when she discovered them. In her testimony, Cassie didn't try to paint herself as a saint. She told the truth, even when it was ugly. She admitted to using a variety of drugs during her relationship with Diddy, including ecstasy, mushrooms, GHB, and Special K. But she clarified, this wasn't recreational. This was survival. The drugs, she said, helped her disconnect from what was happening during the freak-offs. She would take them to not be present in her own body. Sometimes she took them willingly. Other times, she claimed they were slipped into her drinks, like Gatorade, without her knowledge. She described the physical toll: vomiting, heart racing, walls seeming to come alive. But more importantly, she described the emotional effect: numbness. She said she would become emotionless, like an object just going through the motions. And she wasn't the only one using. Diddy, she said, took the same substances, as did some of the escorts. The drugs weren't about fun. They were about control. They blurred the lines of consent and reality. And in the middle of it all was Cassie, trying to survive long enough to make it to the next day. The violence Cassie described wasn't a single traumatic event, it was a pattern. According to her, Diddy's temper could flip without warning. One moment he was charming and playful, the next he was cold, angry, or even physically aggressive. Cassie recalled several moments where Diddy hit her, threw her to the ground, or intimidated her with psychological threats. One incident stood out in particular. After she tried to leave a hotel during one of the freak-off sessions, she said Diddy threw her down by her neck and hoodie. A hotel security video, which was reportedly shown in court, captured this moment. That footage, paired with her testimony, hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. But the abuse wasn't always physical. Cassie spoke about how Diddy would criticize her appearance, telling her she looked too ethnic or needed to change her hair. He would command her to work out in preparation for their private encounters and sometimes take away her belongings, like her phone or laptop, as a form of punishment. Her independence was chipped away slowly, replaced by a system of control and submission. It wasn't just about power. It was about erasing her sense of self until she no longer knew where she ended and his control began. Diddy's control over Cassie wasn't always overt. Sometimes it was wrapped in the illusion of love. According to her testimony, he would shower her with gifts, call her affectionate nicknames, and make her feel like she was part of his inner world. But that affection, Cassie explained, often came with strings attached. In one revealing moment, she said he encouraged her to call him Pop Pop Pop, a nickname that mimicked what she used for her grandfather. At the time, she went along with it, thinking it was harmless. But in hindsight, she said it felt deeply disrespectful and controlling. This duality, affection mixed with dominance, left Cassie emotionally confused. She admitted that she often backtracked on her own boundaries to avoid making him angry. Emails presented in court showed Cassie trying to pull away from the freak-offs, only for Diddy to respond with messages that hinted at guilt, manipulation, and veiled threats. Cassie said she was afraid to challenge him directly because of how unpredictable his reactions could be. Even when she expressed discomfort or dissatisfaction, she was met with silence, coldness, or sudden outbursts. It was a toxic loop, one that made her feel increasingly powerless despite the illusion of being in a relationship. Another alarming aspect of Cassie's testimony was the role staff members allegedly played in maintaining Diddy's control. According to her, assistants, security personnel, and close aides weren't just bystanders. They were part of the system. She mentioned individuals by name, including Christina Korm, whom she nicknamed KK, Drock, and others who were tasked with watching her, supplying materials for private sessions, and even confiscating her devices when she displeased Diddy. Cassie described how she was constantly under surveillance. Diddy didn't need to be physically present to know where she was. He had people to do that for him. If she went somewhere without telling him, she might find a security team outside her door. If she acted in a way he didn't approve of, her phone or laptop might mysteriously disappear for a few days. These weren't coincidences, they were tactics meant to isolate and control her. And when asked about safes, located in Diddy's various homes, Cassie said she had seen cash, jewelry, cameras, and tapes stored inside. These weren't ordinary safes, these were vaults of secrets. Cassie's testimony also described a world that extended far beyond the music studio, a world of unpredictable risks. In one instance, she was allegedly asked to carry a weapon in her bag while on the way to a club in Los Angeles. She was high on substances at the time and terrified. The request didn't feel optional, and the setting was tense. She didn't know what the night might bring. There were other stories too, like the time Diddy and some men dressed in all black armed themselves and left in an SUV after an argument involving another music figure. She didn't know what was going to happen. She just knew it wasn't good. In these moments, Cassie said, she felt completely out of control. She wasn't just an artist anymore. She was in the middle of situations that felt more like movie plots than real life, except she couldn't walk off set. It wasn't just about fear for her own safety, but the creeping realization that the world she was in didn't follow the same rules as everyone else's. There were no timeouts, no managers to step in, no safe word, just decisions being made around her, sometimes involving weapons, with her in the middle whether she wanted to be or not. One of the most tragic parts of Cassie's story was the contrast between what the public saw and what she was living through privately. On the outside, it looked like she was living a dream, dating a music mogul, traveling the world, being in the studio. But behind closed doors, she was experiencing emotional chaos. She testified that even though Diddy was publicly linked to another woman at times, their private relationship continued, with all of its dysfunction intact. Her music was sidelined, her name was kept in the background, and yet she was involved in deeply personal parts of his life, from being around his children to living in the same city just blocks away from him. She said she lived in fear of doing anything that might make him upset. Even mundane things, like attending a party or expressing interest in releasing music, could lead to arguments or punishments. There was no balance, no fairness. She wasn't allowed to grow professionally or emotionally. And by the time she realized how deep she was in it, she felt it was too late. The freak-offs were no longer occasional. They were routine. The drugs were no longer optional. They were required. And her voice? It was muffled, buried beneath years of trying to please someone who only saw her as an extension of his own desires. Cassie's testimony reached its emotional peak when she described the moment she tried to reclaim her life. It was around 2017 or 2018 when she decided to walk out of one of the sessions, just days before a major career event she didn't want to ruin. She said she left the hotel room only for Diddy to chase after her, furious. According to her, he physically assaulted her, dragging her by the neck and taking her phone and bag. This moment was caught on hotel security footage, a video that was played in court. That incident, paired with the years of trauma she had endured, was her breaking point. She testified that she realized she was no longer willing to stay quiet or play along. She described how difficult it was to talk about any of it at the time, how shame, fear, and loyalty had silenced her for so long. But now, in federal court, under oath, she was finally telling the truth, and the room was silent. Because in that moment, it became clear Cassie wasn't just another celebrity. She was a survivor who had finally found her voice.